Before I start this video, I wanted to let everyone know, that way they don't feel like I tricked them, that this is a long story and it's going to go into quite a bit of detail. It's written a little differently than the normal stories I do on here, but I definitely think it deserves a spot on here. If you aren't into the long stories, don't worry, I'm going to have another video posted later today, and I also had one yesterday. I just wanted to give everyone a heads up so that way you have the time to sit all the way through this if it's something you're interested in. And without any further ado, let's begin. Have you ever wished death on someone? I'm sure you've been so mad, so upset, hurt beyond understanding. We've all been. And I'm sure when one of those things happened, and one person was responsible for the feeling or action, you wished them dead. Through your tears and gnashing of teeth, you've had this one moment of pure malice, and said to yourself, or possibly out loud, "Dead. I wish you were fucking dead." And for a brief moment, you probably meant it. But it fades. You calm down and accept that what happened can't be changed. You sleep it off. You might even feel guilty for thinking and wishing such a terrible fate on the person that caused you pain. Now, for a more sinister and disturbing question. Have you ever considered killing someone? Seriously, have you honestly considered taking someone's life, only to be deterred by the ramifications and consequences of the act? Being caught, being arrested, sent to prison, or possibly being put to death if the state or country you live in has the death penalty? Many of you will say no. Some of you will sit in silence and remember when you considered it. Don't worry, you're not alone. Now, here's a loophole to consider. What if the person you wished dead, the person you seriously wanted and considered killing, was dying from an unseen circumstance? A circumstance that you had a small amount of control over. You had the ability to save them, and just didn't. You wouldn't be technically murdering them, not personally sucking the life away from them with your own hands, just letting what was happening happen. Now, think on that for a moment. How would you feel? Would you help if you could? When seeing the person you wished were gone actually dying, how would you react? Would you be sad, scared, guilty, happy, or even satisfied? I met my ex-husband when I was 19 in college. He was this dark and mysterious guy that all of my dude friends were 100% sure was gay. He always dressed very nice, nicer than any young adult should dress to go to a community college. Pants were always pressed, shoes were dressy and shined, his hair was always perfectly in place. Plus, he drove a light purple convertible, so I could see why they might think that, but I knew he wasn't. I was an extrovert that tried to be friends with everyone I met. If you didn't want to talk or socialize, I'd pry and drag it out of you. I must have been annoying to some people, but I had a list of guy and girlfriends that were always so withdrawn and introverted, but I had pulled them from their cocoon with my personality. This was who I was. My ex, Danny, was one of those people. Didn't talk to many people in class unless he had to, and never hung out in the games room like a lot of us in between classes. A couple of my friends that were in class with him finally poked and prodded at him until he came to play some pool in the games room one autumn day. We started talking a little bit here and there. I couldn't get anything really personal out of him for weeks, but I was becoming pretty fixated on him. I don't know why to this day. I was never the girl that was romantically attracted to the mysterious and overly private guys. I already had a boyfriend named William, but I was becoming very annoyed with him, even before Danny was in my sights. William should have stayed a friend. We had the same video game likes, and we both enjoyed to quote movies and songs, but he was so over-emotional. He'd pout if I wouldn't have sex with him every time I came over to his place. He was moody, and always got whiny if I did anything without him. I was ready to drop him. Several months after chipping away at Danny's social shell, he followed me into an elevator to get to the third floor of one of the campus buildings, just chatting about tabletop roleplay, when suddenly he kissed me, and a rush of deafening silence blew out my eardrums. Desire, lust, satisfaction, and victory filled my veins, and I knew that everything would change. I broke up with William that evening before I would allow myself to do anything worse while still attached to the withering relationship. William was crushed, but I was honest. Danny and I became a hardcore item very quickly. Summer break started. He lived with his sister, and she was on and off crazy diets, constantly losing weight and over-exercising. She started taking some weird diet pills she had ordered online from a foreign country and had hellish mood swings. She started screaming at Danny for stupid little things, and then turned her attacks on me for being there too much, even though most of the time I was there, she wasn't. I started to leave, and he told me to wait out by my car. He came out 15 minutes later with 2 boxes, his book bag, a laundry basket, and his box fan that he couldn't sleep without being on. It helped me sleep with him due to him having some of the worst snoring problems I'd ever been around. He was so loud, and it took a lot not to wake him up out of a deep sleep. He asked me to follow him to his grandmother's apartment, which was 10 minutes away behind the mall. She lived there with her husband and Danny's mother. They had a spare bedroom, and had always told him to come live there if he wanted to. After explaining what was happening with his sister, they said no problem, and he introduced me to everyone. I got the feeling they didn't like me. They had a Viper vibe about them. I was right. The whole family was judgmental, and downright mean at times. His mother tried to act like she liked me, but every time Danny and I discussed anything within earshot, she'd interject her opinion. If we ever disagreed on anything, she'd pull me into a bathroom or outside to lecture me on how his life has been rough, and he needs to know I'm agreeable and all about him. It kind of freaked me out, but I just nodded, then rolled my eyes when she wasn't looking. How weird and shallow, I thought to myself. You can't expect a girl to just bow to everything a boyfriend says and wants, even if it is your son. Whatever. I just went back to enjoying my time with Danny. He had been living there 2 months or so, and I had been spending the night very often. One night around midnight, Danny's grandfather suddenly died in the house. His grandmother went a little nuts, understandably. She needed someone to focus her grief, anger, and sadness on, and I was in the crosshairs. She wanted me to not be around. She said that I wasn't family, and she didn't want me to be family. Basically told me I wasn't worthy of her grandson's attention, and told me to go back home. I was upset to be the scapegoat, but I started gathering what belongings were mine and started to leave. Danny wasn't having that, so he told his grandmother that if I left, he left. We ended up living in a really cheap hotel you could rent by 2 weeks to 3 weeks. He dropped out of college and went full-time in his job. No decent apartment complexes would rent to 2 20-year-olds who weren't married, so we decided to just go ahead and make that leap. After a quick justice of the peace ceremony, we found an apartment that rented by the month. Not a great place, nor that safe, but it was what we had. I was on the pill, and never missed, but I somehow ended up pregnant and got the official doctor's report on my 21st birthday. His family immediately did a 180 and couldn't wait to bring us back into their lives. His grandmother and mom insisted we move back in with them so we could have other financial support and they could buy the baby stuff. After having our first child, extended family would come over at all hours and insist I bring her down for them to pass around like a pot of mashed potatoes at a potluck dinner. His mother was becoming heavily addicted to Xanax and painkillers after his father's death, and was always woozy. One night she came into my room while Danny was working a graveyard shift and picked up our daughter to bring her downstairs. I woke up to the sound of someone thumping down the stairs. I shot up and found my baby missing from her crib. I feared the worst and ran downstairs. His mother was at the bottom on her ass, with my baby wrapped tightly in her arms, still asleep by some miracle. His mother was so stoned she didn't even realize where she was or what just happened. She had slipped on the carpet in her thin socks and bounced down the steps on her butt. I grabbed my baby and placed her back in her crib. I went back downstairs where the pillhead was still just sitting there and looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You ever touch my baby without my permission again, I'll kick your teeth out. Do you understand me, junkie?" She just stared at me, unfocused. I stayed up all night and waited for Danny. When he walked in around 6 a.m., I told him what happened and that he had 1 month to find us a place on our own or I'd move back into my mom's house with our child. We were out of there in 2 weeks. Same apartment complex, though. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. to knocks by this fucking family wanting to see my daughter. I called the cops numerous times. The whole family told him he needed to control me or they'd disown him again. He felt heartbroken, but he chose me and the baby. Things got strained between me and Danny after that. Money was tight, of course, but it was more than that. He was never satisfied with how I cleaned the apartment or did the laundry. His demands for sex became next to impossible to satisfy. If the baby woke up during, he'd get irate and start screaming and throwing stuff, start muttering that we were here first and he was sick of the kid coming before his own needs. I forgot to pay the phone bill once, and after we had gotten the notice, he slapped me while I was holding the baby. I was in shock. He apologized soon after and swore he'd never do that again, that he was just stressed. A year into our apartment living, his sister, that was now off of her diet pills, called us. She and her husband had moved to New England because she had gotten accepted to a small law school up there, and her husband was a manager of a big-name hardware store. They wanted us to move in with them, and her husband would make him an area manager. I had never lived out of the state I was born and raised in, and I was terrified. I hated the thought of being so far away from my mom and family, but I was married, and when you're married, you support your spouse and do what is best for the household. We moved upstate, and found out we were once again pregnant. His sister and brother-in-law hadn't been entirely honest with us. Danny didn't move right into being a manager, but I expected that. His sister and her husband fought constantly, not yelling and cursing. They threw things and woke us up in the middle of the night. She'd physically attack her husband, leaving scratches and bruises on his face. He never laid a hand on her, but would push away from her when she attacked. She even broke his arm with a baseball bat once. Our kids were constantly terrified, and I was furious. Danny kept telling me just to ignore it and to turn the fan up to a higher level to block out the noise. He seemed used to it, and would usually sleep right through the late-night fights. I never noticed their fights when we were living down south, but his brother-in-law worked third shift, and his sister was at work or in class often. I learned later that his father and mother would get into physical fights, and he got beat by his father as well. I wanted to go home. I wanted out of this war zone. But Danny kept telling me we weren't financially secure enough to move back, and we were staying put. I was stuck in the house all day with 2 kids. I had to do everyone's laundry, cook every day for 4 adults, and clean up after his sister's dog that I hated. It was a small dog, but it nipped at my older daughter once, and I smacked the shit out of it. She told me to never touch her dog again, and that my undisciplined little toddler must have provoked him. They were later sued when it attacked a food delivery guy that never came near him. I hated that damn dog. Things started getting worse and worse. When I'd refuse sex, or to do something sexual I just wouldn't do, he'd hurt me. He'd take all of my phones out of the house and the computer tower with him to work so I couldn't call my mom or talk to my friends on MySpace. Danny completely isolated me to where I had to earn his favor just to talk to my loved ones and to stave off loneliness. He started calling me fat, ugly, pathetic, useless, and a mistake. Told me that these damn kids didn't come first, and he did. And the sooner I learned that, the happier I'd be, and the safer we'd 3 be. That terrified me. I was stuck. I had no money, no car, no means of escape, and I was over 900 miles away from my mom. They didn't have the money to buy all 3 of us airline tickets and a cab ride to the airport. Even if they did, he never let me get the mail. I slipped into a deep, deep depression. I took care of my babies and kept them as happy as possible. I stopped fighting when he wanted to have sex. Then he'd start beating me when I wasn't into it. If I hadn't have had my kids, I probably would have just taken my chances hitchhiking home or killed myself. But they were my life, my reason for getting up and dealing with it all. Another year goes by, and Danny has gained a lot of weight. He had always been a terrible, loud snorer, but the extra 70 pounds or so just made it worse. He developed severe sleep apnea, but refused to do anything about it and denied it was happening. Most nights, I ended up taking the kids into the living room to sleep, my older daughter with me on the pull-out sofa bed and the baby in the mobile bassinet. I could still hear him all the way in the living room, so I'd turn up the exhaust fan over the stove for some white noise. The kids and I ended up sleeping in the living room permanently. That bed was for him, and when he wanted sex. I never slept in it again. One night, The kids were asleep in the living room, and I couldn't sleep because of how depressed I was. I was watching the TV on a very low volume with subtitles on. Every snore he let out made me so angry and hurt. He wouldn't even go to a goddamn sleep clinic so his wife and kids could sleep in the same room. His years of abuse in all forms were making me tighten up and clench my teeth. I wanted to scream. I looked at my beautiful, innocent little girls and said to myself, I can't wish I'd never met him. I wouldn't have them if I hadn't. I needed to get out. I needed to get my kids and run. But how? I couldn't even call the cops when he abused me because he took the phones. I never imagined myself in one of those battered wife situations you see on TV. I was living in a nightmare. Suddenly, I realized I hadn't heard him snore in a few seconds. I assumed he had turned over at first, but he snored even when he got on his side. There was nothing but faint murmurs coming from the TV and the stove exhaust. I got up and walked towards the bedroom door. Nothing. Suddenly, there was a thunderous gasping sound that exploded out of the dark. His breathing was rapid, like someone who had held their breath for a long time or had been punched in the stomach. I was stunned. His sleep apnea had evolved into the stop breathing stage I had read about. I sat by the door for over 2 hours and I counted 15 times that he didn't breathe for over 10 seconds or more, then would gasp and catch his breath, never waking himself during these episodes. I told him the next morning and urged him to go see a doctor. He flat out refused and told me to shut up about it. Over the next 6 months, his sleep gasps continued, as did the abuse. One night, his sister and brother-in-law had taken a vacation to Cape Cod and had put the damn dog in a kennel. Danny had come home and was furious that I hadn't cleaned the tub yet. He slammed me into a wall stud. It hurt terribly, and I had some blood coming out of the back of my head. I was terrified that I might have a concussion and told him that I needed to go to the ER. He refused to take me and said that if I leave the kids there, he wasn't changing any shit diapers while I was gone. I was too scared to leave the kids with him anyway. Now I was trapped with a head injury. I sat in fear for hours, praying that when I went to sleep, I didn't die from an untreated skull crack. I kept sobbing and breaking into tears, and he'd tell me to shut the fuck up and quit being a pussy. After he finally went to bed, I put the kids in the living room and was just too terrified to sleep. I heard his snores go from faint to loud, then to his typical deep sleep deafening. I had read more on some medical website about sleep apnea and the lack of breathing. It said that most episodes last 10 through 15 seconds. If a breath isn't taken soon after that, bad things could occur, such as brain damage and sudden cardiac death. I sat on the floor next to the sofa bed in the living room and heard him snore over his high-powered fan. In and then out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't understand why he won't take this seriously. I even recorded him on my DV cam one night to prove he was doing this. 14, 15, 16. He knocked the camera to the ground, shattering the view screen, grabbed me by the wrist and twisted. He growled into my face. I said drop it. 24, 25, 26. Once, I had tried to prop him up more at night by slipping another pillow under him to increase airflow. He woke up and told me to stop bothering him, said he couldn't sleep at an incline, to leave him the fuck alone. 36, 37, 38. I sat numb, thinking to myself, he doesn't care about me. He doesn't care about our children. He doesn't even care about his health. Just wants what he wants at the moment, and if that need isn't satisfied, he gets evil. He is evil. He is a demon. 47, 48, 49. What did that website say? How long can you go without fresh oxygen before you start to have brain damage? 1 minute or so? He could die in his fucking sleep. 57, 58, 59. I slowly and silently stood up, and as quietly as I could pushed the door open to fit my body through, but not enough for any light from the TV in the living room to flood the room. I walked over to the bed and stood by the side that was formerly mine. I stared down at him, covers pushed down to only cover his lower torso and legs. I fixated on his deflating abdomen, watching it not rise in a normal sleep rhythm. The moonlight was peeking in through the droop in the blanket curtain he had put up, and its light fell upon my left arm, showing the yellowish-blue healing bruises his fingers had left from grabbing me. The air in the room felt so heavy, even with the fan blowing right on me. I closed my eyes and was suddenly aware of every pain my body had. Exhaustion, mouth pain from a broken back tooth he had cracked, bruises, pain in my genitals, heartbreak. I had lost count of the seconds by now. I think it had been nearly 2 full minutes and he hadn't taken a breath, and I realized this was probably my last chance to shake him awake, to save him from dying from his own weight, denial, and stubbornness. Then I suffer the consequences of waking him, being beaten again, my only communication with family and friends taken away from me like an insubordinate teenager, forced to do sexual acts that I didn't want to do, then to be beaten for not pretending to enjoy it, to have my life threatened and my children's lives in danger of his neglect and future abuse. These were the gifts I was receiving for saving him. I looked at him and took a silent, deep breath and said to myself, "No, no more." I leaned over a little closer to him. I think I could see his lips turning a bit bluish, but that could have just been the moonlight. I mouthed the words as I refused to let out any sound. "Roast in hell." I made sure I was just as silent going out as I was coming in. I closed the door behind me, turning the knob to the right to bring the latch inside the door, then only slowly releasing it when it was flush with the hole. I slowly walked back to the living room and looked down at my sleeping babies, so peaceful and carefree. I felt joy for the first time in months, and turned the TV off so I could hear any noises being made at all, just in case the bastard came to. I sat wide awake on the sofa bed until what I assumed was 4 or 5 a.m., just listening, waiting. I eventually fell asleep, only to be awoken by the sounds of the neighbors upstairs getting ready for church and Danny's sister shuffling into the bathroom. It was Sunday. I laid there in a slight doze until I heard the baby stir and want a bottle, which woke my other daughter. I folded up the sofa bed, changed diapers, and fed the kids breakfast. I made sure to look like my gloomy, depressed self when his sister and brother-in-law came in and out for coffee and food. He asked me if Danny worked today, and I just shrugged. He knocked on his door, and I held my breath. No answer. He knocked again, this time saying, "Yo, Danny, you work today, dude? It's 10 till 8. He walked away from the door to stick his dog on a leash and walk outside. About 15 minutes went by and his brother-in-law walked the dog and his sister showered. I just sat there on the sofa while my older daughter munched on cereal with a cut-up banana, and my baby was sitting in her playpen playing with her busy beads. I controlled my face to stay on a fixed autopilot depression. Inside my head, I was dancing. His brother-in-law came back in and stuck his head into the bathroom to see if Danny was up and showering. Seeing the bathroom was empty, he walked up to his bedroom door and opened it. Again, I was counting in my head. 1, 2, 3. The ambulance came, and I stuck my oldest daughter and her baby's playpen in the computer room with a Disney movie and pulled the door mostly shut. I didn't want them to see his cold, purple body. His brother-in-law, after seeing him in bed, discolored and stiff, had gone into panic mode and pulled him down onto the floor to perform CPR. I just stared at him frantically pumping at his chest, then stopping when he felt how cold his skin was. It was too late. He had already voided his bowels, and his entire backside was swollen with clotted blood. An autopsy determined that he had died from a lack of blood oxygen and his heart shutting down. Time of death was concluded to be about 1 or 2 a.m. when I was in the living room with the kids. His sister and brother-in-law told the cops and medical people everything. How he snored loudly, how he would stop breathing in his sleep, how worried I was, how I begged him to go to the sleep clinic. I hardly had to say a word. They took me to be a wife in shock of her husband's untimely and sudden death just 2 rooms away. I went back down south 5 days after the funeral. I used as little of his life insurance to pay for the services as I could manage. I refused to pay to have his corpse shipped back home. The family didn't have a plot anyway. His grandfather was buried at a veterans cemetery, and the other plot paid for there was for his grandmother when she finally kicked it. His plot and footstone is in a shitty cemetery in a bad neighborhood where headstones are constantly vandalized and garbage blows around. It was fitting, in my opinion. In a way, that son of a bitch committed suicide. Aside from my children, it was the best goddamn gift he ever gave me. I can finally breathe. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you check out the description for information on how to submit your stories. I know this story is a little bit different than the ones I do on my channel, but I rather enjoyed the nice little change. If you didn't enjoy this particular video, don't worry too much. I posted a video yesterday, and I'm going to have another short one up with the same types of stories that I normally do. This was just something I wanted to do as a nice change because it felt more in-depth. I want to give a special thank you to everyone helping me trying to reach 100,000 subscribers by my birthday. I really appreciate everyone sharing the videos, and I'm really hoping we can get there. I got about 9 days to get about 7,000 subscribers. I've had days where I've made over 1,000 subscribers in a day, so it's not out of the realm of possibility, so we're just gonna have to wait and see what happens. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.